You're listening to the UnSafe Bible with Pastor Ken Brown.
What's being described as events taking place in the upcoming overthrow of Babylon isn't the near overthrow of Babylon, it's the far overthrow of Babylon. There's elements that, are going to take place, but there are elements that still have to take place. The barbarity, those things that we're seeing, that's going to happen in the future because it didn't happen in the past. What we see in the remaining verses of chapter 13 shows that Babylon is destroyed, never to again be rebuilt.
As Pastor Ken continues his teaching series through the book of Isaiah, he'll be explaining how Isaiah's prophecies have come to pass, as well as how future prophecies will imminently be fulfilled. Babylon is mentioned from Genesis to Revelation, as it rises from its rebellious beginnings to become a symbol of the Antichrist's evil world system. God promised to punish the king of Babylon and his nation for all the wrong they have done in Zion. Ultimately, all evil will be judged. Well, let's join Pastor Ken in the book of Isaiah, chapter 13, as he continues his message, Prophecies about Babylon.
Reference to the Medes, we see that the Lord's the executive manager of history. He's the one that's going to make sure that this all takes place. They're going to be the destroyers of Babylon, where they're going to be the ones who take over Babylon, because Babylon's not really destroyed. We're going to see that. We think that the Persians took over. Well, it's the Medes and the Persians. We also see it referred to as the law of the Medes and the Persians in Daniel chapter 6. And we have a description of the conqueror in Daniel chapter 5 as Darius the Mede. So we've got to leave it to Isaiah. He kind of kept everything the way he wanted it. But as we have seen this, we see what the scripture says and we get this idea that, the city was destroyed. And if you look at some of the commentaries, they'll kind of lead you to believe, Babylon was destroyed at this point. No, not really. And remember, we also saw in the scripture where it said they weren't doing this for silver and gold. They weren't doing it for the money. There's a conversation that takes place that's recorded by the historian Xenophon. And Xenophon says this in regards to the conversation. He says, "Men of Media and all here present, I'm sure that you came out with me not because you desired to get money," there it is, "by it, or because you thought that in this you were doing Cyaxares a service, but it was me that you wished to do this favor, and it was out of regard for me that you were willing to make the night march and to brave dangers with me." So Cyrus was saying, basically, you were doing this because you wanted to honor me. Now we see in verse 18, "And their bows will the bows will mow down the young men. They will not even have compassion on the fruit of the womb, nor will their eye pity children." What was the weapon of choice for the Medes and the Persians? Well, Herodotus tells us that the weapon of choice was the bow and the arrow. In his description of what they wore as a uniform, he basically says they carried short spears, long bows, and arrows of reed. And we also see elsewhere with Xenophon and also with Herodotus that there were thousands of bowmen that were connected with the Medes that went to Babylon. They followed also in the steps of Middle Eastern armies. It was all Middle Eastern armies of this age did this. They attacked pregnant women. It's referenced in the scriptures in Amos 1:13, Hosea 14:1, 2 Kings 8:12, and 15:16. They rip open the womb of pregnant women. That's one of the ways that they would terrorize people, but also that's how they would ensure that there were no soldiers coming up that would from women that would remember what happened, because they were killing everyone. So what we're seeing is that this army that's being discussed, that's going to take Babylon, and we think it's the Medes when you start looking at this, kills indiscriminately to include children, and surely they did in some cities. But is this describing what the Medes and the Persians did when they took over Babylon in 539 BC? In the Medo-Persian takeover, there was not a lot of change that took place in the city. Remember, they kind of came in. By the way, the same time that they're coming in, there's this party going on that we read about in the book of Daniel. and somebody's writing on the wall, and Daniel comes in to interpret it to Belshazzar, and Belshazzar's drunk, and so that's what's going on while the army is coming in. And you kind of have to put the pieces together. It wasn't destroyed, though. The city was not destroyed. Life went on. In fact, there were some people within the city that didn't know it had been conquered until days later. Xenophon, the historian, again says that when day dawned, those in possession of the citadels, these are the various protective outward-facing towers that would protect from foreign armies. They were expecting a siege from the Persians and the Medes. They discovered that the Medes and the Persians were approaching them from the inside of the city. That's a problem. The city had been taken, the king was slain, Belshazzar was no more, and they surrendered the citadels. There was nothing else to do. I mean, it was a done deal, so they surrendered. It says that Cyrus at once took possession of the citadels. He set up guards and officers of the guards in them and basically took over. In other words, what's being described as events taking place in the upcoming overthrow of Babylon isn't the near overthrow of Babylon, it's the far overthrow of Babylon. There's elements that, are going to take place, but there are elements that still have to take place. The barbarity, those things that we're seeing, that's going to happen in the future because it didn't happen in the past. What we see in the remaining verses of chapter 13 shows that Babylon is destroyed, never to again be rebuilt. And that wasn't the case after the Medes and the Persians took over in 539 BC. Alexander the Great died in Babylon. It was his headquarters. It eventually did fall out of disuse and just kind of people walked away. But destroyed? No, not really. And commentators have trouble with this because there are some who say, it was destroyed over time. But this talks about a destruction that is serious, severe, and permanent, and that hasn't happened. Not yet. It will. Cyrus, for example, went to great lengths to ensure that agriculture production continued. He wanted to make sure that there were crops, that he would get taxes. I mean, you don't conquer a city the size of Babylon without expecting to get money from it. He wanted it to be a source of cash. He needed cash flow. He had armies to feed, and he had militaries to take care of, and he had people and a government to run. He didn't want to destroy them. He wanted to have them on his side and be good tax-paying citizens. He even held over some of the administrators under the Babylonian government into his government, people like Daniel and others. So the picture here is a picture of what's going to happen, but not all of it has happened just yet. So it says in Isaiah, continuing on in our text, "And Babylon, the beauty of the kingdoms, the glory of the Chaldeans," pride. Again, it's all about pride. "Will be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah." Okay, so there's your picture. Sodom and Gomorrah is the example of what Babylon will eventually look like. And we're going to take a look at some pictures. They're in your notes that of the current, or where we think Sodom and Gomorrah are. And then we've got an aerial photograph of Babylon. And what we're going to see is there's not a lot of comparison at the current time. It says it'll never be inhabited or lived in from generation to generation. That's not the case right now. "Nor will the Arab pitch his tent there, nor will shepherds make their flocks lie down there. But desert creatures will lie down there, and their houses will be full of owls. Ostriches will also live there, and shaggy goats will frolic there. Hyenas will howl in their fortified towers, and jackals in their luxurious palaces. Her faithful time also will soon come, and her days will not be prolonged." Now that sounds ominous just by itself. But wait till you see what the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation made by 70 or so rabbis several hundred years prior to the coming of Christ. Let's see what it says. "And Babylon, which is called esteemed from the king of the Chaldeans," okay, pride of the Chaldeans, "will be the way God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah." Okay, that picture again, it's going to look like Sodom and Gomorrah once it's done. "It will not be inhabited for eternity." That's how the rabbis interpreted the Hebrew. nor will they enter it for many generations. Nor will Arabians go through it, nor will shepherds by any means rest in it. And wild animals will rest there, and the houses will be filled with sound. That's unusual. It gets worse. And sirens will rest there. In Greek mythology, a siren is part bird, part woman, with a woman's head, and they lived on islands. Now, are we saying that's what's going to be living there? Or is this a reference to the powers behind the throne at the end of the age, the demonic powers, the fallen powers? We'll get to that going on. And divine beings will dance there. Well, there you go. And donkey centaurs will settle there. If you're not already thinking it's weird, this is weird. And hedgehogs will make dens among their houses. It's coming quickly. It will not delay. Suddenly we see clearly that there are different ideas that the rabbis had when they were translating this. And what they show us is there is more than an abandoned city being inhabited by wild animals. Of course, that does happen, but there's another aspect to this. Again, we're getting a physical view, but we're also now getting a spiritual view. Verse 19 tells us that Babylon's going to be like when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, we see that in Genesis chapter 19, verses 24 to 28. The Lord rained down sulfur and fire, so think burning, on Sodom and Gomorrah. It was sent down from the sky by the Lord. So he overthrew those cities and all that region, including all the inhabitants of the city, and the vegetation that grew from the ground. But Lot's wife looked back longingly and was turned into a pillar of salt. Abraham got up early in the morning and went to the place where he stood before the Lord, and he looked out towards Sodom and Gomorrah and all the land of the region and saw the smoke rising up from the land like smoke from a furnace. So if we take a look at where a lot of archaeologists think Sodom and Gomorrah were in the five cities of the plains, you're talking about the east side of the Dead Sea. And you're talking to the south side of it, okay? The five cities of the plains included Sodom and Gomorrah is an area that to the east side of the Dead Sea. Now, there are three theories, archaeologically speaking, as to where the cities were. There's a northern theory where they're north of the Dead Sea. There's another theory where they're in the Dead Sea. And then there's another theory that they're south of the Dead Sea off to the east. And that's the one I tend to look at. Whether you think it's north, central, or east, it's not a doctrinal issue. It's just that's where the archaeology seems to indicate. Now, the southern Sodom theory has some scholars argue that the area called Bab et Dira and Numira, which are on the southeast side of the Dead Sea, were Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, Isaiah 13 says that Babylon will be like what that area looks like today. Now, archaeologists who have looked at Bab et Dira find that it was violently destroyed, and excavations have revealed that there is a layer of ash and destruction there that's nearly a meter thick. So there's evidence of sudden destruction. Now, in your notes, there are photographs taken by Todd Bolin. Excellent research. He's allowed photographs. He's allowed us and given us permission to use these. This is from his pictorial library of Bible Lands. You can access that at BiblePlaces.com. But he has pictures of Bab et Dira, and when you take a look at it, there's not a lot left. There's not a lot left at all. The first photograph that we have in your notes shows the Western Gate, or what's left of it. And then as you look back at the what would have been Sodom from a distance, it's a tell. It looks like a mountain. But look at the area around it. There's nothing there. It's desert. It's all desert. It's pretty abandoned at this point. And then you go to Numira, and there's a photograph of the tell in Numira. It's the same treatment. It looks just about the same. There is one tree in the picture, but it's an abandoned area. And then there's another photograph that shows the east fortifications. And again, if you take a look at the foot of the fortifications, which is a stack of rocks, you see evidence of ash and destruction there. It's throughout the area. Now, the next picture in your notes is an aerial photograph of Babylon taken recently. And you'll see that it's along the Euphrates River, so it's a lot greener than what you see in the Dead Sea area. There is a building right next to the river that has a circular drive to it. That's one of Saddam Hussein's palaces that was taken when Allied forces took Iraq. But off to the side, you see Babylon, or what the ruins of Babylon. Saddam Hussein was actually rebuilding it. He was actually having his officers commissioned in the same area that officers would have been commissioned by Nebuchadnezzar. He was having bricks with Nebuchadnezzar's name on it and his name on it. You'll also see there's compounds around there. The United States military actually used that area as a base for a while, and so did Allied forces during the invasion of Iraq. And does it look like what Sodom and Gomorrah look like? No, not exactly. Not exactly. The scripture says again, it will not be inhabited or lived in from generation to generation. You see, there's a house there. Saddam Hussein lived there. You also see there's other areas where people live. An Arab won't pitch his tent there. Yeah, well, that's not the case right now. Nor shepherds make their flocks lie down there. That's not the case either. We do know that Babylon was overthrown by the Medes and the Persians, just as prophesied by Isaiah. We know that. But we also know there's a future side to the fulfillment as well. The downfall of the spiritual, political, physical Babylon, and if that's what it's going to be called, the book of Revelation calls it Babylon. It calls spiritual Babylon and calls the city of Babylon. And that may be a word that's being used as a sign of what that looks like, or that may actually be the word. We don't know that for sure. But we do know that this prophecy points to the final fulfillment of the destruction of this city, this political system established by the beast and the false prophet. It's the ultimate fulfillment when the armies of the east move in and take out Babylon on their way to Armageddon. We talked about that in our study of the book of Revelation. Now, first, it should be established that when prophets make predictions, they don't know when it's going to happen, and they don't know how it's going to happen. And as we've discussed before, sometimes when they make a prophecy, they see the near fulfillment and the far fulfillment almost look like they're the same. They don't know there's something else in between. Jesus actually made reference to that when he was talking in the synagogue, and he quotes from Isaiah and then stops suddenly. He doesn't go through the whole prophecy. He covers the point that deals with the first coming. The last half of that prophecy deals with the second coming. The main point of this prophecy is that God's sovereign. God oversees history. He's going to make sure that the Babylonians who were involved with the destruction of Israel, they get theirs. They do. But he's also talking about the end of the age Babylon as well. And so we see that it's going to be fulfilled relatively soon, but it's also going to be fulfilled in the future as well. So looking at the next verse, which is verse 21, but desert creatures will lie down there, and their house will be full of owls. Ostriches will live there, and shaggy goats will frolic there. That's what it says in the New American Standard. What we're getting is a picture, and that sounds like a picture of animals coming into this abandoned city and taking up residence. Again, here's what the Septuagint has. And wild animals will rest there, and the houses will be filled with sound, and sirens will rest there, and divine beings will dance there. This is weird stuff. And again, as Dr. Heiser says, if it's weird, it's important. So that's kind of where we're at this point. It's weird because what we're getting is a picture of the fall of Babylon, but there is a spiritual aspect to this fall as well as the physical aspect to the fall. And that's what chapter 13, verses 21 and 22 are about. To unpack a little bit of this, we also have to understand something called cosmic geography. And that's the understanding that the Jews of the time would have had of their understanding of what took place in Genesis chapter 11 and how the nations were subdivided. And you have ungodly nations with different gods overseeing them. And then you have Israel, which is ruled by Yahweh. So remember, when the nations sinned and rebelled at Babel, they were given instructions specifically by Yahweh to fill the earth, to multiply and fill the earth, not to multiply and fill the plains of Shinar, which is where they all were. But the instructions are in Genesis chapter 9, verses 1 to 7. Very, very clear. There's also another issue that took place at Babel. They were trying to recreate conditions that existed in Genesis chapter 6 that were the cause for the flood in the first place. So let's go to Genesis chapter 10 and take a look at verses 8 through 11. There we have a description of some of the different nations, but it talks about Cush. Cush fathered Nimrod. Now, Nimrod's going to be the ruler of Babel when everything happens. He was the first to be a giant. This is what it says in the Septuagint. The first to be a giant upon the earth. The Hebrew is Gibor. But you can see what the Jews thought about it when they translated it. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord, which we'll see that phrase before the Lord means in rebellion to the Lord. Because of this, they will say, as Nimrod was a mighty hunter before the Lord, and the beginning of his kingdom became Babylon, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh in this land of Shinar. By the way, the ziggurat of Babel is not in Babylon. Okay, so let's forget that for now. From the land he went out to Assyria and built Nineveh and the city of Rehoboth and Calah. So that's what it says in Genesis 10. The Septuagint considered Nimrod to be a giant. And it says before Yahweh, which tradition says is in opposition against God. The Hebrew shows Nimrod to be a Gibor, a mighty one, which was translated by the rabbis to Gigos, giant. So is there something going on with Nimrod? Did he find something? Did he do something to himself physically? We don't know. But those are interesting terms that are being used. In Genesis 11:4, when the rebellion takes place, it says, then they said, come, let us build a city and tower with its top in the heavens so that we make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we'll be scattered across the face of the earth. Again, in Genesis 6, we see mighty men who want to make a name for themselves. They were giants wanting to make a shem or a name. We have the same thing happening here, the same picture. They were trying to replicate what was going on back in Genesis 6. So here, and we also see that there's a reference in this rebellion in Genesis 11 to the divine council, just as there was in the beginnings of the book of Genesis. In verse 5 to 7, it says this, the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. And the Lord said, behold, they're one people. They all have the same language. And this is what they began to do. And now nothing which they purpose to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language so that they will not understand one another's speech. There's no royal we in Hebrew. This is not the Trinity, which is what I got taught in Bible school. This is the divine council. That's who God is talking to. And they go down and they confuse the languages. So at Babel, the nations of the world all had one language. They directly disobeyed God, and they all went into a single city. A key expression that shows up here 5 times is all the earth in this section of Scripture. The entire human race is determined to be sinful because they're not doing what God wanted them to do.
Because you decided to stay tuned, you've just been a part of the UnSafe Bible with Pastor Ken Brown. Do you know how glad it makes our hearts to know you're investing time in your relationship with Jesus? So much. In fact, would you connect with us and share a little about what's been happening in your life and how this radio ministry has affected you? The unsafebible.com has a space for you to do just that. Go to the Connect tab at the side and then click on the Connect card. Once there, fill out the form, and then we'll be sure to touch base with you. Pastor Ken's message from Isaiah today left me reflecting on my own life and how I treat people. Do I treat them how I want to be treated? Do I give them the cold shoulder when I feel like it? Or do I choose kindness over retaliation? Isaiah was one of the major prophets that confronted some of these common issues we still face today. You don't want to miss any of these teachings. Trust me. If you already have, don't sweat it. We have your bases covered. Just go to the unsafebible.com and click on Media. There you'll find this and other messages to listen to. If Go 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 is your middle name and you can't seem to find a still moment, you can follow us via Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. We'd also like to personally invite you to attend one of our services. Find all the information you need, including directions, at our website. And just in case you've forgotten, it's the unsafebible.com. We hope to meet you soon. That's it for today. Thanks for listening. Come back again for more of the Unsafe Bible.